For more on the presidential immunity case, here with us is federal defense attorney Ronald Chapman. Ronald, great to see you again.
Good to see you, too.
Let's talk about the current makeup of this court. How do you expect them to rule on presidential immunity on Monday?
Well, I've been saying it all along that President Trump is going to get some form of immunity. I think that's pretty clear based on the oral argument. I also think that that's abundantly clear based on the decisions that we've seen, namely Fisher versus United States, the most recent obstruction case. This entire term, the Supreme Court has been rolling back prosecutorial power, and Jack Smith's indictment of Donald Trump does stretch statutes a little further than I believe this court will allow. The only question will be the official acts question that needs to be decided on remand after Trump gets this decision on Monday.
I'm curious, do you see the ruling on Monday helping either of Trump's ongoing federal cases here, Ronald?
Absolutely. Well, I certainly think it'll help the January 6th case. You know, the interesting question, though, is how does this help the case with Fani Willis down there in Georgia? And I think that there are very good arguments that it should. There's a federalism argument. If a federal official should not be indicted for these types of offenses because they have immunity in the federal sense, we should expect the state governments to accept that immunity and not also prosecute. If the system were different, then we would have state officials kind of usurping our laws and indicting folks to prevent them from taking federal office, which is not something that we would be able to tolerate. So I do expect some arguments in Georgia down there by Steve Sadow related to the January 6th and immunity Supreme Court ruling.
In April, when the case was argued, we had you on the show. We know a majority of the justices appeared poised to grant Trump at least a partial victory. They agreed presidents cannot be prosecuted for what they called official acts. They didn't seem to be aligned, though, with the absolute immunity argument. Trump has also pushed that as well. Of course, his team has. What could this mean for Trump if he does not, at the end of the day, get absolute immunity?
Well, I think the absolute immunity argument gets pretty silly when we look at some of the examples that were postured by the court. We don't want presidents to be completely immune from the law as a matter of policy. So if he doesn't get absolute immunity, then the real question is going to be, how does this immunity apply to Donald Trump? What were the official acts? Now, his counsel during oral argument before the Supreme Court laid out the things that Donald Trump that would be considered official acts, namely making speeches, namely campaigning for the next office of President of the United States. There are many things that Trump did on January 6th that were official acts, but here's really where the rubber meets the road. When you have a collection of official acts that were done wrongfully, and then you have an unofficial act that was done wrongfully, are you able to use those official acts as evidence? That is a very tricky question that I think the judge in this case is going to have to decide after the Supreme Court makes its ruling. I hope they address it in their ruling so we don't have that open question, but the Supreme Court doesn't always go that far when they make a ruling.
I'm going to follow up with how would a ruling either way impact future presidents in our country, Ronald?
Well, yeah, this is certainly something that came up during the debates, right, when Donald Trump was specifically asked about whether he would retaliate against his political opponent. Are we going to end up with a society that is filled with lawfare where each president is attacking the prior president or their political opponents? That's not something that we want. And that's one reason why immunity is relatively important for those official acts. And in fact, that was one of the main arguments that Donald Trump's counsel made before the Supreme Court. We don't want a system like that. And I think if there is immunity for official acts, we've calmed things down. If there is no immunity granted, which I think is impossible, but if there's no immunity granted, we will continue to have a system where these types of political attacks will be tolerated. And that's not something any American should really want.
We have about 30 seconds left. Why has the court waited until the end of its session to deliver the ruling for Trump?
Well, good question. I think that perhaps that's because this is one of the most difficult questions to decide. There's a lot of consensus building that needs to happen at the court to see if we can get something other than a 6-3 decision, which is what I likely expect to see. Maybe it's even closer than that. But the one main reason I would think is that the court doesn't want this decision to overshadow the importance of others. For instance, Fisher versus United States. That has implications for 300, potentially 1,000 people. Chevron that decision had an impact on millions of people, and the court wants people to pay attention to those decisions and come out with a Trump immunity case after.
Ronald Chapman, always appreciate our conversation, sir. Thanks for waking up so early. We appreciate it.
Thank you so much. Good to see you.
You as well.